Have you ever been deep in the woods, far away from houses, cars, or even the sound of your own phone buzzing, and felt like something was watching you? That's what happened to me one summer when I agreed to house sit for a friend. Their cabin was tucked away in the mountains of northern Washington, surrounded by endless miles of pine forest. The cabin itself was simple. One floor, a front porch, and a small deck in the back that looked out over a slope of trees that just seemed to fall forever downhill. Around midnight, I started to hear something outside. At first it sounded like the creak of the deck boards, like someone was walking around out there. Then I heard it again, slower this time. Thump, creak, thump. I worked up the nerve to peek through the curtain facing the deck. There was nothing, just the faint outline of trees lit by the moonlight. But the boards had groaned like weight was on them, human weight. By morning, the sunlight pouring through the windows made it all feel silly. I convinced myself I'd let my imagination run wild. When I came back up to the cabin in the late afternoon, I noticed something strange. On the side of the house, near the deck, there were muddy smears on the wooden boards. Long, thin streaks, like something had dragged its fingers across the wall. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed something standing just beyond the railing. It was tall, too tall. Its shoulders were hunched forward, and its arms seemed to hang lower than they should. And the worst part, the eyes. Two small, pale glints of light, almost white, reflecting back at me. On the third night, everything escalated. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they weren't on the deck, they were on the roof. Creaking, shifting weight, moving slowly across the shingles, then bang. A crash at the back of the cabin. I saw the window on the deck shatter inward. I didn't wait. I ran out the front door and sprinted down the gravel road in the dark. Have you ever gone camping deep in the woods and had that unsettling feeling that someone or something was watching you? After what happened to me 2 summers ago, I'll never go camping again. We arrived on a Friday afternoon. By the time we finished setting up the tents and building a small fire, the sun was already dipping behind the trees. Kyle cracked open a beer and handed it to me. "Relax, man," he said. "You'll love it out here." At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up suddenly to the faint sound of footsteps. I held my breath and strained to listen. The steps circled my tent once, then stopped directly in front of the zipper. The next morning, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Around our campsite, in the dirt, were bare footprints. Human footprints. And they were big, much bigger than any of ours. Then, suddenly, the footsteps rushed forward fast, pounding toward my tent. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the back wall, heart hammering, waiting for the tent flap to rip open. But just before reaching me, the sound stopped. When I woke up at sunrise, I stumbled outside. That's when I noticed something even worse than the footprints. Around my tent, carved sloppily into the dirt with a stick or a knife, were words, "I see you." We didn't argue about it this time. We packed up immediately and left. On the drive home, Marissa admitted she'd woken up and thought she saw a shadow standing outside their tent, but it wasn't me. Have you ever been alone in the woods, so deep that your phone loses signal, and suddenly felt like something was watching you? I had that exact experience 2 years ago, and it still keeps me from hiking alone at night. About a mile into my descent, I heard the first snap of a branch behind me. I stopped, listening, and swung my flashlight around. Nothing. But then it happened again. Closer. Like something was deliberately stepping where it knew I'd hear. That's when I heard it. A low whistle. Not a bird call, not whined, an unmistakably human whistle. 3 notes, almost playful, drifting through the trees behind me. I stopped for just a second and called out, "Who's there?" The forest answered with silence. Then, after a beat, I heard something that froze my blood. The whistle again, but this time it mimicked my exact tone. Up ahead, the trail split. I turned left. As I did, a voice called out from the right trail. Low, raspy, almost taunting. "This way." I felt pure terror in that moment. I burst out of the trail onto the shoulder of the road. I turned back, shining my dying flashlight toward the trail. For a split second, I saw him. A tall figure just at the edge of the trees. His eyes reflected white in the beam of my light. Then the flashlight went out. The next morning, I returned to the trailhead. At the spot where the trail split, I noticed a boot print in the dirt, large and deep, facing toward the shortcut. Not mine, fresh. Someone really had been there, waiting. Have you ever been so sure you were alone in the woods, only to realize maybe you weren't? Last fall, I was hiking deep in the old-growth forest as dusk settled in. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of moss and pine needles. Every step I took seemed to echo in the silence. I'd been hiking for hours, lost in my thoughts, when I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping behind me. I stopped, convinced it was just a woodpecker or a branch swaying in the wind. But the sound stopped too. Exactly when I did, I started walking again, a little faster this time. The tapping resumed closer, matching my pace. My heart hammered in my chest. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves. But every instinct screamed otherwise. Suddenly, from just a few feet behind, the tapping changed a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through the underbrush. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand, and caught a glimpse of movement. Someone ducked behind a tree, just out of sight. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The only answer was the fading echo of my own voice and the relentless whisper of the wind. I didn't wait to find out who or what was behind me. I ran, branches clawing at my jacket, breath burning in my lungs, the dragging sound fading but never stopping. When I finally burst out of the trees into the safety of my car's headlights, I looked back one last time. To this day, I still wonder what followed me through those trees, and whether, next time, it'll let me leave. I needed an escape from the city, so when my friend offered their cabin in the pines, I jumped at the chance. The air was crisp, the silence almost too deep. The first night, as darkness pressed against the windows, I heard its slow, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. My flashlight cut only shadows. On the second night, a low knock rattled the door just after midnight. I peered outside. No one. But a fresh warning was carved into the nearest tree: don't stay. Sleep was impossible. Each night, the footsteps grew bolder, a shadowy figure lingering at the edge of the trees just out of reach. My last night, the knocks became pounding, echoing through the pine-scented gloom. I grabbed my bag and ran, the forest closing in behind me. Even back in the city, I still hear those knocks in my dreams. Sometimes, just before dawn, I wake to find pine needles scattered across my floor, and the feeling that something from those woods followed me home. I've never considered myself an easily frightened person. Growing up in the city, I always sought adventure, and hiking alone in the wilderness was my way of proving to myself that I could handle anything. When I first heard about Black Pine Trail, a remote, dense forest far north, I knew I had to explore it despite the locals' warnings. I started early, backpack loaded with essentials. The forest swallowed me almost immediately. Tall pines stretched endlessly, the air thick with the smell of needles and damp earth. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The silence felt unnatural, as if the woods were holding their breath. For the first hour, the trail was easy. Sunlight filtered in golden shafts, and I started to relax. But then, the trail markers I'd memorized weren't where they should be. Every turn looked familiar, yet wrong, as if the forest itself was shifting around me. I shrugged it off and pressed on, but unease crept in. Around midday, I stopped by a small stream to rest. As I knelt to drink, I heard the first snap of a branch behind me. I froze, heart pounding, listening as another snap echoed deliberate, measured, following me. I stood and turned, but saw only shadows. "Hello?" I called, my voice thin. Silence. I walked on, but the snapping followed faster, closer. My pulse quickened. I tried to appear calm, but inside, panic was rising. By afternoon, I knew I was lost. The sense of being watched was overwhelming. I stumbled into an old, abandoned campsite, rusted cans, a torn tent, and a fire pit filled with ash. My instincts screamed to stay put, so I set up my own tent nearby, hoping for safety. Night fell. My flashlight revealed twisted tree trunks and branches that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Whispers drifted on the wind at first, just the trees, but then words, "Come out." I froze, listening as the whispers circled my tent, taunting, never stopping. I tried to stay sane, talking to myself, but every rustle became a footstep, then a snap behind me, different, closer. My flashlight caught a tall, impossibly thin figure moving between the trees, its face lost in shadow. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't notice me. By 3 a.m., I couldn't stay. I packed in a frenzy and fled into the darkness. The snapping followed, faster now. I ran, crashing through underbrush, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly, illuminating only twisted trees and shifting shadows. The footsteps mirrored mine, every stumble, every pause. I dared a glance back. A distorted humanoid shadow darted between the trees, impossibly fast, always just out of reach. My lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. I found a creek and followed it, desperate for escape. In the mud, I saw footprints, large, heavy, coming from all directions, converging on my path. Panic surged. I bolted, the figures breathing close behind, cold and steady, matching my own. I collapsed, exhausted, as a towering figure loomed over me, silent, watching. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. The forest was still. I forced myself up, followed the creek, and finally found a marked trail. I ran until I reached a road where a driver stopped and called for help. Weeks later, I read about Black Pine Trail disappearances, abandoned campsites, strange footprints. Some say the forest swallows travelers whole. Even now, in my apartment, I sometimes hear faint rustles and footsteps in the silence. And I wonder if the forest ever truly let me go, or if it's just waiting for me to return. Raven's Hollow was the kind of forest that locals only spoke of in hushed tones, but for me, the lure of the unknown was irresistible. I'd conquered trails all over the north, never once shaken by ghost stories or warnings. So, when I heard about the maze-like woods of Raven's Hollow, I packed my gear and set out before sunrise, determined to prove the legends wrong. The trees here were ancient, towering, gnarled, their canopies blotting out the sun. The air felt colder, thicker, as if every breath was borrowed. I pressed on, my boots crunching over damp leaves, the only sound in a world where birds didn't sing. Hours passed, and the trail twisted deeper. That's when I heard a faint, childlike sobbing echoing between the trunks. I followed the sound, nerves prickling. In a small clearing stood a girl, maybe 8 years old, her dress white and stained with mud. She didn't look at me at first, just wept, hunched over. When she finally turned, her eyes were pitch black, her smile too wide, stretching impossibly across her face. I stumbled back, heart racing, but in a blink, she was gone, swallowed by the trees. The woods shifted. Trails I'd mapped were gone, replaced by endless tangles of undergrowth. Whispers rose, circling me soft at first, then urgent, pleading, "Follow me." I tried to retrace my steps, but every direction led deeper into darkness. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, flickering between the trunks. Abandoned campsites appeared and vanished, rotting tents, half-buried toys, cold ashes. Childlike footprints appeared in the mud, always fresh, always leading away from the path. I called out, desperate for another voice, but only the wind answered, carrying a giggle that sent chills down my spine. The forest pressed in, branches clawing at my jacket, roots grabbing my boots. The girl's face flashed between the trees, always watching, always smiling. Panic took over as the sun vanished behind storm clouds. I ran, branches whipping my face, the girl's laughter echoing all around. The woods bent and twisted, leading me in circles. My flashlight flickered, revealing glimpses of her standing just ahead, beckoning with a crooked finger. I broke through the trees, breathless, stumbling onto a deserted road. The laughter faded, swallowed by the stillness. I looked back. Raven's Hollow waited, silent and patient. Even now, safe at home, I dream of those black eyes and that impossible smile. The girl in the woods is still out there. And sometimes, late at night, I hear her calling my name,